Once a week we do book talks about old books, and stick around. Today's is a fascinating story. It's about the Hobbit. We're going to talk about the first edition of the Hobbit, but we're going to talk about how the story came about. There's just an awful lot to say. I want to hang out here for just a minute before we start. Hopefully we'll get a few people to come into Periscope to listen. If you're in Periscope already, send us some hearts and tell us where you're from, and we'll say hello. What we do is we record this in Periscope. It stays up for 24 hours, and then we put it into YouTube where it stays for a long time. So if you're not seeing this on Periscope, if you're seeing it on YouTube, then you can check out all of our others. Every week we put up a new one, and it all has to do with book collecting, old books, and that sort of thing. So today we're going to do The Hobbit, and I guess I better get going. We don't like to waste your time. I'm going to tell you the story about how The Hobbit was written. In 1925, J.R.R. Tolkien was given a professorship at Oxford University, which was pretty unusual because he was only 33 years old at the time. Nonetheless, professors at Oxford did not get paid really well in those days. Tolkien had a growing family. He needed to make some extra money. So to do this, he graded exam papers for Oxford. At the end of term, they had papers that had to be graded, and he would do it and get paid for it. He hated it. He hated it. It was so boring. One day in 1930, he was grading an exam paper. They were done in notebooks, so he turns the page, and the student accidentally left a page blank. He was thrilled. He didn't have to read a page. Later on, years later, he said he thought about giving the student extra credit for giving him a page that he didn't have to read. So there he sits with an empty page. He picks up a pencil and he writes on that blank page, in a hole in the ground, there lived a hobbit. And that changed everything. That's one of the most famous first lines in the history of literature. It's considered one of the greatest first lines because it's so simple, and yet you wonder, what's a hobbit? You know, what kind of hole is it? And all that. So it's one of the great first lines. I thought I'd mention a couple of the other great first lines. Moby Dick, Call Me Ishmael, that's a great one. Tale of Two Cities, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. And then my favorite, I think the best first line ever written by Jane Austen, Pride and Prejudice, and it says, "It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a great fortune must be in want of a wife." So these are great first lines. I'm chasing rabbits now. Back to The Hobbit. Tolkien, when he wrote that, believe it or not, had no idea what a hobbit was. He had no idea what a hobbit hole was. He didn't know that hobbits had furry feet. He didn't know that they were unadventurous. He had seen, he was a language expert, and he'd gotten the word hobbit from some language, but he hadn't threshed out at all what hobbits were. But he started writing the book. He was a perfectionist, so he wrote slowly. By 1932, he had a few chapters written to give to his friend C.S. Lewis. Lewis said it was great. Lewis really encouraged him to write and publish. And without Lewis, there's a good chance that The Hobbit would have never been published. Tolkien kept writing and sent it to the publisher. In 1937, the first edition came out in Great Britain, and in 1938, it came out in the United States. So here is a picture of the first American edition. It's a very expensive book because the British first edition was printed only 1,500 copies. The American only 5,000 copies. That's a very small print run, but Tolkien was a nobody. So that's why they started with such small print runs, and that's why those books are so scarce today. They're scarce in the first edition, but they're not scarce otherwise. The Hobbit is the third best-selling book in the history of books. Now, that list of best-selling books, they remove the Bible, the Quran, and the sayings of Mao. So it doesn't include those three. But apart from those three, The Hobbit is the third best-selling book of all time, 140 million copies. So it's a great book. Now, how do you know if you've got an American copy by Houghton Mifflin? How do you know if you've got a first edition? Fortunately, this one's easy. Sometimes they get pretty complicated, but I'm going to show you how you can tell. On the title page, in the first edition, is that little, they call it a device, but it's a picture of a bowing hobbit. He's holding his hat in his hand, he's bowing. If you have a 1938 Houghton Mifflin copy of The Hobbit with a bowing hobbit, you have a first edition, period. If you don't have a bowing hobbit, you do not have a first edition. There's other points of first editions, but you don't need to know them, because the only one you need to know is the bowing hobbit. The book is quite valuable. If you have, let me mention one thing, that the real bookies out there have already noticed. This dust jacket is too perfect. This is not an original first edition dust jacket. It's what we call a facsimile. It's a copy. It doesn't add any value to the book, but it just dresses up the book and makes it look better. So this book, as we're selling this book, it's a book that essentially does not have a dust jacket. And this copy, if you had one like this and you went to sell it, you might get $1,000, $1,500, something like that. If you had the dust jacket, the original first edition dust jacket, you would get several $1,000s. And if you had a British first edition, one of those 1,500 first British ones, you would get, even without a jacket, you'd get a few $1,000s. And with a jacket, you would get over $10,000. It's a very scarce book, and of course it's one of the great books of the 20th century, and so that's why it gets so much attention. And fortunately, the first edition is not difficult to tell in this book. Now, if you got any questions, punch them in real quick, because we're just about to wrap up, and I'd be happy to answer any question that somebody has. So if you're on Periscope, just punch in the question, and I'd be glad to answer it. If you're watching on YouTube, you can email us at shellyandsonbooks@gmail.com. Shelley is spelled S-A-G-L-L-E-Y, like the poet. shellyandsonbooks@gmail.com. And our website is www.shellyandsonbooks.com. So if you want to know more about The Hobbit, if you want to know more about the first edition, just get in touch with us. It's a great book, and that's one of the great stories about the beginning of a novel. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week. Next week we'll probably be doing, I think, the Hemingway book, The Old Man and the Sea. See you then. Bye.